Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel, where I like to ask questions that nobody else has bothered about, such as why do we all perceive colours differently? And why is there no street lighting in public parks in the UK? No, seriously, that seems like a massive safety issue. Is there a concern children wouldn't go home once it got dark? Or have drug dealers and cutbacks and public spending just ruined it for everyone? Anyway, I'm getting a little off track. Now, for a long time, I've had an interest in children's media, probably since I was a child, funnily enough. So much so that while studying for my animation degree, I had the intention of working in children's television, until I was told by a guest speaker at my university that the only way I'd get to work in that industry is if I was willing to be a children's television presenter.
Please, no! No!
But despite the poor outlook for my potential career in children's telly, along with, well, my equally poor animation skills, the thought of at least discussing British children's television through either retrospectives or critical reviews had always been at the back of my mind. I'm now finally at a stable point in my life where I can delve into this topic without having to worry about how I'm going to feed myself and keep a roof over my head. So here we are, and what better way to start off a retrospective on children's television in the UK than with one of the oldest children's television programming time slots I could think of, Watch with Mother. Now, for a while, I genuinely thought this was the oldest children's programming block to be aired in the UK, but then I realised it was lacking a particularly popular marionette, Muffin the Mule.
We want Muffin, Muffin the Mule, dear old Muffin, playing the fool. We want Muffin, everybody sing. We want Muffin the Mule. Hello.
Yeah, I think if I had seen this as a child, it would have put me off telly for life. And I'd probably be a healthier adult for it, as I would have played outside more. Anyways, this honour belongs to a programme called For the Children, a programme aired at school-aged children in which dear old Muffin made his debut in 1946 and was first aired on the BBC in 1937. A pretty ambitious adventure, considering there were very few households in the UK with access to a television back in the 1930s. What's more impressive is that it survived its World War II hiatus and continued until 1952, where it would eventually be superseded by other television programmes, including Watch with Mother. This is about as much as I'm willing to discuss For the Children, as I know very little about it, and this video is supposed to be about one of the oldest examples of children's telly that I have personal experience with. But I thought I should mention this show, just for the sake of context. So onward to Watch with Mother. Created by Frida Lindstrom and Maria Bird, no relation of course, it initially began airing on Tuesday afternoons between 3:45pm and 4pm under the name For the Very Young in the summer of 1950, with its first programme being Andy Pandy, followed by Bill and Ben Flower Pot Men in December of 1952. The block became so popular that by 1952 it gained a second weekly airing on Thursdays, and Lindstrom had hinted that Andy Pandy and the Flower Pot Men would soon be joined by more friends under a new title, Watch with Mother, which became the block's official name in 1953. The title was chosen not only to coincide with a similarly themed radio programme, Listen with Mother, but also to reassure concerns that television was becoming a nursemaid to very young children and encouraging bad mothering. Oh, how times have changed. I can only imagine what such people would make of Teletubbies when that began airing in 1997, or the fact that we now have whole channels dedicated to Tots Telly, or even half the content of YouTube Kids. But let's not get off topic too much.
Hi, I'm Bob! I know a merry little song all about phonics!
I'll get to you someday. The slot would eventually see its airing time expanded to 3 afternoons a week in 1953 and would go on to get its full daily service by 1955. This would eventually lead to the established timetable of Picture Book on Mondays, Handy Pandy on Tuesdays, The Flower Pot Men on Wednesdays, Rag, Tag and Bobtail on Thursdays, and The Wooden Tops on Fridays. The programming schedule would remain in place for pretty much the next decade, with a new generation of shows being ushered in within the 1960s and 70s, including Camberwick Green, The Herbs, Mr. Ben, and many others. The programme's time slot would eventually change round over the years to include mornings as well as afternoons, and eventually, with social attitudes towards women changing for the better in the UK, the title Watch with Mother would be dropped within 1970s, as it had become outdated now that many children would watch the programmes with their childminder or playgroup whilst mum was at work. I'd also like to think that dropping a title that assumes children's telly can only be watched with a mother must have been quite a relief for any hands-on or single dads or grandparents at the time, which I'm sure plenty did exist pre-1970. But I know what you're thinking. Lazy bird, you jabbering parrot who's probably copying and pasting all this info off Wikipedia. And you're half right. If you're not some sort of pre-suffragette dinosaur, how on earth could you remember such shows? Well, the reason I remember these shows was thanks to the rise of VHS video cassettes in the 1980s and 1990s, which would lead to many old television shows being released onto these home formats for a new generation of children to enjoy. Watch with Mother would see 4 VHS releases between 1987 and 1993, and I remember having the first 2 video releases simply titled Watch with Mother and Watch with Mother 2. They only contained 1 week's worth of programmes on each tape, so not exactly a complete collection. But at the time, it was appreciated that some of the shows were at least being preserved in what was the most modern format at the time. The first video contained the episodes Picture Book, Paper Lanterns, Andy Pandy, Pram, Flower Pot Men, Seeds, Rag, Tag and Bobtail, The Hazel Twig, and The Wooden Tops, Introduction. The second video contained the episodes Picture Book, Bush Baby, Andy Pandy, The Cart, Flower Pot Men, The Potato, Rag, Tag and Bobtail, Snowballs, and The Wooden Tops, Horseshoe. The last 2 videos released would change the programmes featured around and stop being numerically titled, instead being called Watch with Mother, The Next Generation, and The Very Best of Watch with Mother. Now, I will mainly be discussing the shows within the first 2 videos, as I never saw the last 2 videos as a child, as I had never owned them. Heck, I didn't even know they existed until I started researching for this video. So you will have to forgive me for not discussing popular classics such as Camberwick Green or The Herbs. I might discuss those shows in a future video, but for now I just want to focus on the classic lineup and discuss my initial thoughts on each show, both when I watched them as a child and looking back on them now as an adult with my own children. So let us begin with the Monday slot. First broadcast in 1955, Picture Book is essentially a precursor to preschool arts and crafts shows like Mr. Maker and such, with additional sections of self-contained stories featuring other characters such as Busy Lizzie with her wishing flower, and a group of sailors called the Jolly Jack Tarts. It would also show cute animals such as baby chicks or a bush baby as seen in the episodes on the videos. They are all connected together as being part of different pages in the titular Picture Book, hosted by Vera McKechnie, with what I personally think is the world's most adorable marionette of a sausage dog. It's a show which manages to pack a lot of variety into its 15-minute time slot compared to the other shows in the block. while still remaining a very chilled affair. Sometimes the craft sections could do with a little bit more refining. For starters, during the paper lantern making episode, it's not always clear what she's doing, as it's shot from a single non-moving perspective with no close-ups. Plus she at one point warns the children to be careful not to prick their fingers whilst using pins, but makes no comment of her choice to use a gigantic pair of scissors and glue. Also, I find it quite funny she suggests when using pins that they should get a grown-up to help them, when the show is literally titled Watch With Mother, so you'd think the showmakers would assume they've got their mum with them at hand. Otherwise, heaven forbid the television becomes a nursemaid! But that's just me nitpicking. I adored this show when I was little, or at least the 2 episodes I had available, and I still find it charming as an adult. After all, it's just a nice, calm show about going through a picture book with a motherly-like lady and reading all the stories and activities in it and watching it all come to life through stop motion and puppets. And that, to me, is pure bliss.
You pin yours. Be very careful you don't stick the pin in your finger, won't you? Perhaps you could ask somebody to help you to do this part.
Moving on to Tuesday's slot. Now, Pandy is quite an interesting one. As mentioned earlier, it predates the time slot, beginning its airing in 1950. And it was originally broadcast live until 1952, when the creators realised they could repeat the programmes if they were filmed instead of being shot live. Thus, they recorded 26 episodes around 1952 and repeatedly aired them until around 1969. The show then got 13 new episodes filmed in colour around 1970. The show was first narrated by Maria Bird, with Vera McKechnie taking over when the series went full colour. The show stars the titular Pandy, who was apparently based on Paul Atterbury, who was then the young son of puppeteer Audrey Atterbury. And from looking at them, I can kind of see the resemblance now. And now I can't stop picturing Paul Atterbury in that weird stripy blue Pierrot-like costume that Pandy wears, and that's kind of funny to me. Pandy is a marionette who lives in a picnic basket in a garden with a teddy and a doll called Looby Loo. Yes, that is actually her name. For years I thought it was Loopy Loo, but no. Upon paying attention, it's actually Looby Loo, which as an adult sounds like a bit of an inappropriate name for a children's character. But never mind. Weirdly, in the show's canon, Andy and Teddy are aware of each other's sentience, and that's fine, but for whatever reason, Looby Loo coming to life has to be kept a secret. And whilst I never questioned it as a child, it kind of bothers me now, and I don't know why. Another thing that bothered me as an adult rewatching this is, for whatever reason, some of the song segments came across as a bit, well, haunting. Sometimes I was getting slightly upset over them, which I didn't really understand why. Maybe it was a combination of nostalgia overload, combined with generally feeling a bit emotionally wiped out at the time of watching it, which was just after the Christmas holidays. That said, the main song that seemed to set me off was on the episode on the first video, where they're all singing about Andy on a swing. So maybe it's something to do with the pitch and tone, or sung at or something. Those things aside, I like the show's premise of all these toys coming to life to play in the garden. It's very sweet, and I can see why many people who grew up in Britain during the 50s and 70s have such fond memories of this little boy puppet in weird stripy pyjamas, having fun with his teddy and dolly. But at the same time, the combination of old black and white film and marionette puppetry does make it look quite creepy. So I understand why some people might be put off by that.
La, 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 la. La, 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 la.
Wednesday.
Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Bill and Ben, Powerpuff Men.
Another classic marionette series with a memorable theme tune. This was the second oldest show that began airing in 1952. It followed the adventures of Bill and Ben, two magical flower pot men who secretly lived in the garden of what I assume is a magical house. I mean, it's got a big grinning face. There's clearly something going on there. Also, look at the size of the plants growing outside it. They're giant! And they would only come out to play once the gardener went into the smiling house to have his tea. They would usually get up to silly antics, such as trying to figure out how seeds grow, whilst dancing around to sing songs, and occasionally playing pranks on each other. They would also hang out with a dandelion flower called Weed. Now, the Flower Pot Men was a show I thought I liked. I remember my parents having very fond memories of it and wanting to instill such fond memories on me as well. But looking back, I mainly remember losing interest after the first 5 minutes and playing with my dolls whilst listening to it in the background. And as an adult, I find Bill and Ben remind me of the elf on a shelf craze combined with really obnoxious garden gnomes, and they just got on my nerves. The whole show comes across as a bit chaotic and noisy compared to the first two discussed. Still tame by modern standards, but enough for me to find it irritating to watch. That's not to say it's a bad show. For the 1950s, I imagined it seemed pretty out there and innovative, whilst Picture Book and Nandy Pandy remain fairly grounded with use of animals and objects that exist in real life. The Flower Pot Men are completely fictitious creatures composed of, well, flower pots, giving them a sort of fantastical quality, and I imagine their mischievous nature was probably there to appeal to boys the most. But I could be wrong there. Now that I think about it, with the crazy looking house, gigantic flowers, a literal talking weed, makes me wonder whether the people who made this show were into certain substances a decade before it became popular. Either way, it's a fun show, just not my cup of tea personally. Thursday. Ragtag and Bobtail were created by Frida Lindstrom and David Boissiau and began airing in 1953 and ran until 1965. Interestingly, there were 26 episodes filmed, but only 24 got aired. I assume the first two now are completely lost media. The show stars the three titular characters, Rag the Hedgehog, Tag the Mouse, and Bobtail the Rabbit, who had very simple adventures, with narration provided by Charles E. Sidwell, David Enders, and James Urquhart. Unlike the other shows on Watch With Mother, this one is animated using hand puppets rather than marionettes, which does give this unfortunate effect of making the characters look like they have massive bottoms. But at the same time, it's also quite charming. In many ways, it's aged better than a lot of the marionette productions, which come across as quite creepy nowadays. You know a show has really left an impression on you when, as an adult, thinking back to a calm, happy place in childhood, the theme song of said show is the first thing that comes to your mind. That's pretty much what Ragtag and Bobtail is to me. It's very safe. From its straightforward stories to being shot with just one camera and just one plane of motion, and even when the stories had moments of peril, like when the baby bunnies get covered in mud or Rag shuts himself away thinking it's too cold to come out, it never really strayed away from being relaxing. I suppose you could say it's a bit boring, but I still rather like it. It's certainly appropriate for very young children. Plus I'm probably a bit biased, as the narrator reminds me of my own dad, telling me bedtime stories when I was very young. All in all, it's a great show for babies and the very young. Just don't expect it to hold the attention of an older preschooler.
He fell fast asleep in Bobtail's arms. And when Bobtail got back to the others, they were fast asleep too.
Friday. The Wooden Tops is another creation of Frida Lindstrom and Maria Bird, which began airing in 1955 and was regularly repeated until 1973. It stars a family of wooden marionettes who live on a farm in the countryside. There's Daddy Wooden Top, Mummy Wooden Top, Willie and Jenny Wooden Top, who are twins, Baby Woodentop, and Spotty the dog.
Very biggest spotty dog you ever did see.
There was also Mrs. Scrubbit, who would come to help Mummy Woodentop, Sam Scrubbit, who would help Daddy Woodentop with the farm animals, and Buttercup the cow, who was, well, a cow. The aim of the show was to show preschoolers what family life was supposed to be like, and it does this by showing a very sanitised version of a middle-class family in the 1950s. I mean, of course it would. It's the BBC. They're not going to portray the slums of the East End as an example of British family life.
Find my mother! Yes, I am!
The dad goes out to work on the farm, the mum stays home looking after the baby and the house. The twins are very mild-mannered and in stereotypical fashion do everything together, which is a little creepy.
Both together.
The only one who gets to be a little bit devious is the baby, who usually acts up for comedic effect, much to the detriment of Mummy Woodentop. Even the dog is so well behaved. Mummy Woodentop even entrusts Spotty Dog to look after the baby in the garden while she's off doing some other job in the house. You couldn't show that these days, not with social media and news outlets posting all these stories of dangerous dogs mauling children. Also, I like the fact that they live out in the country and other grown-ups have slight West Country accents. Yet because Maria Bird narrating also voices Mummy Woodentop, she sticks to her traditional BBC accent. It kind of makes her come across as a bit of a Hyacinth Bucket character.
It's bouquet.
Either way, whilst I'm sure the families who could afford a television back in the 1950s found this reflection of their lives quite enjoyable to watch, I can imagine this show got very dated as family dynamics began changing, with the rise of feminism and more diverse folk being able to afford their own television sets back in the late 60s and early 70s. It's very much a time capsule of life for an idealist middle-class family in post-war England, and from a historical context, I do find it quite fascinating to watch. It almost gives me a window into what life was like for my own parents growing up, since my dad also had a very middle-class upbringing of growing up on a farm with animals and dogs and such. And for that, I appreciate it. Fun fact, the puppets were actually stolen from the BBC in 1983 and were thought to be lost forever until they turned up at a London auction house a year later. Upon their rescue, they were placed in the Museum of London and have remained there to this day.
Poor spotty dog, they all went away and left him alone.
So, what are my final thoughts? Whilst I did have some mixed views regarding a few of the programmes shown, my opinion of Watch with Mother is mostly positive. Whilst most of its shows look dated and slightly unsettling now, back then it was a pioneer of its time, providing suitable programmes for young children to enjoy during a time when most consumable media was aimed at adults, and without it many of the children's channels we have today, such as CBeebies and Tiny Pop, wouldn't exist in their current forms. It can't be denied that it was the springboard for many children's shows that became endeared into the hearts of the British public. The popularity of Andy Pandy and the Flower Pot Men would eventually lead to the two shows being revived in 2001 and 2002, with Cosgrove Hall producing them using redesigned stop-motion models instead of the original marionette puppets. I can't really discuss these in much detail as I've not seen much of them, as I'd already grown out of preschool shows by the time of their original airings. But from what little I've seen, the production value looks much higher than before, and the updated character designs are certainly a lot easier to watch. I might do a video discussing them in more detail in the future, but I'd recommend checking them out if you're a little put off by the original shows, but are still curious about them, or want to show Andy Pandy and Bill and Ben to your tiny people. If, however, you're a bit of a weirdo, like me, and want to watch the VHS tapes, or perhaps own the shows on DVD or Blu-ray, then you might have a bit of a task on your hand. From what I can gather, while some further episodes of Andy Pandy and Flower Pot Men got their own VHS releases, I have struggled to find any complete collections, let alone anything released on any format more recent than VHS. One DVD listing I did find for Watch with Mother on Amazon turned out to be an unofficial homemade copy, which is no longer available to buy. So it would appear the only way you're going to be able to watch these classics is by hunting down copies of the VHS tapes and a working VHS VHS player, along with any required cables and converters needed to hook it up to your modern flat screen television. But wait, there is hope. You see, thanks to British law stating copyright in TV programmes lasts for 50 years from the date of the first broadcast, many of the surviving episodes are slowly making their way to the Internet Archive. Whilst I've yet to find complete collections of shows, they do appear to have all 4 of the original Watch with Mother VHS tapes, so you can at least watch them on your laptop or tablet fairly easily. There have also been efforts made by YouTubers to archive these videos as well, with them all being uploaded with some varying quality. I'll put links to them in the description below. Whilst it is a shame that no complete collections of all the shows aired are available on DVD, Blu-ray or streaming services, I am glad that effort is being made to preserve the few episodes that did make it to home formats. And whilst I'm not holding out much hope for the full series of Picture Book to have survived the BBC's past habits of taping over older shows to reduce costs, if we're very lucky, perhaps the remaining shows will eventually be found and uploaded to the Internet Archive. In conclusion, Watch with Mother is a significant part of Britain's cultural history, which should rightly be treasured and preserved for future generations to come. If you've made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I enjoyed making it, although I did have to put a lot of work into this, especially working around the children and my own job as well. So yeah, any likes or comments are much appreciated, along with any suggestions or criticisms as such. I am going to try and produce more video content. My ideal is to try and get a video out each month, but I can't promise anything just because of my own hectic schedule and life in general. I'm probably going to try and broaden out my content a bit, so along with looking at children's telly in the UK, I might make other content such as looking at obscure TV shows aired in the UK, as well as some video game content, such as looking at stuff I enjoyed in my childhood, although I know that's quite a bit popular on YouTube, so I'm not sure. What I'm saying is, just watch this space.